Every summer my family and I would travel to Disneyland in Florida. It was a tradition that started when I was 5 years old and my younger brother Xavier was 2. It was just him and I and both my mom and dad that would go with my mom's best friend Sierra and her husband Matthew and her family. We would stay at the resort hotels. Our parents would have their suite and us kids would have our suite. My mom's best friend had one child whose name was Henry. The three of us would always explore the hotel and try to find something new every year. Sometimes we would play tag or hide and seek. The employees never cared and let us play in the hotel. We sometimes even found other kids to play with. This year Sierra's family couldn't come, so it was just my brother and I who shared a room. Since I was 11 and he was 8, our parents suggested that we stay in our rooms at night since we were too old to explore and might get in trouble with the staff. The first night we both told our parents we wouldn't leave, but did anyway. We left the room around 2 a.m. and planned to come back at 3 since our parents were out and weren't coming back until 3 as well. We went on our little normal adventure that we would do every year. This year there was construction on the hotel, so half of the hotel wasn't allowed to the public. My brother and I decided after we ran around for a bit to try to sneak in. Once it was 2:30, we decided it was time to sneak into the other side of the hotel since we had less than 30 minutes to get back into our room. The whole side of the hotel had tall metal security gates, and the only way to get to the other side was through a door in the gift shop inside the hotel. We went through the gift shop and were able to get by the workers since oddly there were a lot of customers that late. Once we made it in the double doors, one of the workers spotted us and yelled, "Hey, you're not allowed to go there." We ran down a long hallway as fast as we could. He tried running after us, but we lost him. We kept running through different doors and hallways until Xavier said he couldn't run anymore. We laughed and laid on the floor talking about how much trouble we were going to be in. A few minutes went by, and we heard footsteps coming towards the hallway we were in. We both ran inside one of the rooms quickly and hid. It was 3 security guards that were practically begging us to come back and shouting this is a very dangerous area. After 30 seconds, they kept walking forward. We came out of hiding and noticed what was in the room we hid in. The room was filled with animatronics. It was like a storage room just for them. Multiple different Disney princesses and characters. Even ones that look as if they were decades old. Some we couldn't even recognize. We wondered why this side was closed off to make it seem like there was construction going on if the hallways and the room we were in looked brand new. Xavier mentioned the carpet on the floor looked like it was recently cleaned and the walls looked cleaned. Even the animatronics were extremely clean. I know that they could have just gotten done with construction and didn't open this side of the area yet, but it gave us a weird feeling that they didn't want anyone coming over here and not because of construction. We stared at each other for a minute, wondering if we were going to stay in this room or if it was safe to leave yet. I looked at my phone and realized that it was 2:57. I told Xavier that we had to hurry back before our parents came to check on us. But once we walked up to the door, I felt a rush of fear as the room was plunged into darkness. The only light was from a small beam shining through the crack at the bottom of the door. I could hear something shifting behind us, and I realized the animatronics were the only thing in the darkness behind us. We both turned around at the same time, and the animatronics that were once so still were now moving slightly. I strained to see in the dark, but when I could make out of my foggy vision was one of the figures, a princess in a flowing gown, that was facing away from us was now facing towards us. The glint of her glassy eyes seemed to glow in the dark. I grabbed his hand, pulling him behind me. I told him to stay calm and close his eyes. Then, I heard a grinding sound. I turned my head just in time to see another figure, slowly turning his head toward us. My heart raced. I tried to convince myself it was just our imagination, but as I looked around, the animatronics were shifting, their mechanical joints creaking. Xavier's eyes opened wide and he screamed. They all started to take slow steps forward. The door handle rattled, and we could hear the 2 workers trying to open the door. They were yelling at us to open the door, but Xavier was screaming for help, telling them it wouldn't open. I froze in fear. I didn't know what to do and how to escape from this situation. The lights above started flickering. I noticed that the animatronics would stop moving every time the lights come on, even for a second. I shouted to get the lights back on. They wouldn't listen and kept on insisting that we needed to come out of the room. Xavier ran into one of the corners and buried his face in his lap and cried. The lights came back on and it all stopped. I turned towards the door and tried to open it. It wouldn't budge, and I explained to the workers what was going on. They instructed us to unlock the door and quit playing games. Xavier ran back over to the door begging for help. Then suddenly the lights went back out again. I used my phone flashlight to try to help us, but this time even the light wasn't stopping them. Then, with a sudden clanking sound, the princess lunged toward us. I yanked Xavier back, and we stumbled, falling against the wall. We scrambled to our feet, backing into a corner, the shadows creeping closer. I could see all of the huge figures looming, grinning impossibly wide. The princess raised her arm as if to grab us. Just when I thought we were done for, the lights flickered back on. The animatronics froze again. The door rattled once more, and I banged on it, shouting for them to get the door opened. Finally, with a loud click, the door swung open, and the pair of workers stood there flashing their lights at us. They walked us back, and the whole time Xavier tried telling them what happened. They said they would look into it, but I know that was just another word for "we don't believe you, and we won't be." They returned us to our room where our parents were. They told them to watch us more carefully, and our parents made us pack and leave that night. They thought they were punishing us, but we were excited to leave that place. I don't think I'll ever forget that night. We eventually told our parents what happened and how we never want to go back again, and we didn't. The magic had vanished, replaced by a chilling memory of locked doors and moving figures. I still remember the day like it was yesterday. It was the end of our junior year, and our school organized a field trip to Disneyland. We were all excited, but there was one thing I wasn't prepared for. What would happen after the rides? It started off like any other school trip. We piled onto the bus, the sound of laughter filling the air as we headed to the happiest place on earth. My best friend, Jake, and I were practically bouncing in our seats. We had plans to ride every roller coaster and take a million pictures. Our classmates made jokes about us being too excited. Me and Jake had never been to Disneyland before, and they have, so it was a new adventure for us. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I had this nagging feeling that something strange might happen. I shrugged it off. After all, it was Disneyland. Once we arrived, we joined our class and headed through the gates. The energy was electric, and I couldn't help but feel a rush of excitement. We ran from ride to ride, screaming and laughing, trying to fit as much fun as possible into one day. After a few hours, we decided to take a break and grab some food. While we were eating, I noticed a sign for a behind-the-scenes tour. It seemed intriguing, but the rest of our group wasn't interested. They wanted to rest and eat more. My teacher, who was the only chaperone of our homeroom on this trip, told us to stay seated because that wasn't a part of our trip. I looked at Jake, who shrugged and said, "Why not? It could be cool." So, we decided to sneak away from the group for a bit and check it out. The tour was guided and only the two of us were there, but as we wandered through the backstage areas, I began to feel uneasy. It was strange how quiet it was, especially after the chaos of the park. The guide led us through various rooms filled with props and costumes, but then, unexpectedly, they had to leave for a moment. They told us to stay put, but Jake and I, being teenagers, thought it would be fun to explore a little further. That's when things started to get weird. We wandered down a narrow hallway that felt darker than the rest of the area. At the end of the hallway, we found a door slightly ajar. My heart raced as I nudged it open, curiosity getting the better of me. The room beyond was dimly lit and empty. I stepped inside, and Jake followed. Once we crossed the threshold, the door clicked shut behind us. We didn't think much of it at first, but when we turned around, we realized we were in a long, narrow corridor lined with identical doors on both sides. It felt off, too quiet and too uniform. The air was stale, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Maybe we should head back," Jake whispered to me. I agreed, but as we turned around, we realized something was wrong. Instead of the door, it was the original hallway before we went through the room. It seemed longer now, and the doors looked different. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Both of the hallways were completely different from each other, but made one long walkway. We didn't want to go back at that point, so we decided to continue going forward. We started to walk faster, calling out for help, but the only response was our own echo. I tried to push open one of the doors, but it wouldn't budge. We tried multiple other doors, but the same thing. It felt like we were trapped in some kind of maze. With every turn, we found ourselves back in the same spot. Jake started to breathe heavily. His voice was shaky when he yelled, "This can't be happening. We need to get out of here." I told him to calm down and to keep walking until we found a way out. After what felt like hours of wandering, we stumbled upon a staircase leading down. We figured it had to lead back to the main area of the park, so we decided to take it. As we descended, the atmosphere shifted. It felt colder, and I could hear an unsettling hum, like a distant machinery that sent shivers down my spine. When we reached the bottom, we found ourselves in another hallway, but this one was dimly lit with flickering fluorescent lights. I turned to Jake, who looked as scared as I felt. I asked if he thinks we will be stuck down here forever. He snapped back, telling me to not speak like that, but I could tell he was just as scared. We continued down the hallway, and just when I thought we were getting somewhere, we hit a dead end. There was a door, but it was locked tight. I pounded on it, being desperate since it was the only door in this hallway and could be the door to get back to the park. Jake suggested for us to go back since there was no way we were getting on the other side of that door. We retraced our steps, but everything felt different now. The hallway seemed to twist and turn in ways I couldn't explain. Panic turned into terror as I realized we had no idea how to get back. I whispered to Jake and said, "I don't know where we are, and I don't know what to do." He didn't respond. I turned to see him staring down another hallway, with a blank expression. I asked him what he was looking at. "Did you hear that?" he said. I listened closely and felt my stomach drop. It was a faint sound, but it sent chills down my spine. A soft, repetitive thud. My heart raced as the noise grew louder, echoing through the hallway. We saw the door slightly open more and more as the noise continued. Suddenly, Jake grabbed my arm. "We have to get out of here. Now." He pulled me back toward the stairway, but I could feel the fear radiating off him. It was contagious. We ran, our footsteps echoing loudly as we fled through the maze of hallways. Every turn we took felt wrong, leading us deeper into this nightmare. Finally, we came upon a doorway that was slightly ajar. Without thinking, we pushed through and found ourselves in a small, empty room filled with old props. I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe we could find a way out, since this was what the rooms in the behind-the-scenes tour were filled with. But then the thudding sound returned, louder and more insistent. It was coming from the hallway. Jake's face was pale, and it looked like he was about to pass out. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. "What is that?" he whispered. I didn't have an answer. My instincts screamed at me to run. But where? There was nowhere to go. I could feel the panic rising inside me, tightening like a vice. I wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but at that moment I knew no one would be coming to save us. Tears grew in my eyes while we stared at each other for a moment. Jake suggested that we should split up, and whoever finds their way out gets help to come and search for the other. I told him that was a crazy idea, but in my gut, I knew he was right. We had to find a way out, and staying together might just get us lost forever. "I'll check over here," he said, pointing to another hallway. "You go back the way we came." I begged for him to stop and we should stay together, but he ran through the hallway. I could hear him shouting, "Be careful," before his voice disappeared into the darkness. I stood there, frozen, listening as his footsteps faded away. My heart pounded as I tried to convince myself he'd be fine. I decided to wait for him there and not move forward. I waited, counting the seconds, but the silence began to stretch on too long. I shouted for him, but there was no response. I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. Panic clawed at my throat. Then I heard it, a faint scream echoing through the hall. My blood ran cold. I shouted Jake, but the sound of his scream reverberated in my ears, chilling me to the bone. I ran back toward the sound, desperate to find him. The hallway twisted around me, mocking my every move. I yelled for him again, but the only reply was silence. I turned another corner and saw the door Jake had gone through was ajar. My heart sank. I pushed it open and the room was empty. Panic surged through me as I realized I was alone. The fear of being trapped consumed me. I thought, this isn't real. This can't be happening, as I tried to hold back tears. I started to backtrack, hoping to find a familiar way out. but it felt like I was wandering in circles. My mind raced as I recalled every detail: the strange rooms, the humming noise, and Jake's terrified face. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, and just when I thought I might collapse from fear, I caught a glimpse of light at the end of a corridor. I rushed toward it, praying it would lead me back to the park. As I approached, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe I'd find help. But as I stepped into the light, it was just another room. A stark, empty space. My heart sank. I turned around, desperate to find Jake, but the thudding sound returned, echoing louder and closer. I screamed Jake one last time, but the noise drowned out my voice. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash from behind me, and I turned to see a shadow dart past the door. I sprinted down the corridor. I ran through a door and saw someone. I screamed but realized it was the guide that was with us at the beginning of the tour. I ran to him gasping for breath, my heart racing. I shouted at him that my friend was lost, and I quickly began explaining everything to him. The staff member's expression shifted to concern. I pointed in the direction I had come from, but as we approached, I felt my heart drop. The hallways seemed to no longer be there. It was just a huge room with a door that he said I wasn't allowed to go into. I mentioned that it was a hallway here instead of a room. He looked at me with confusion, but I insisted that I never saw this room. I told him to go through the door and maybe that was the entrance of all of those hallways, but he denied doing so because we weren't allowed back there. I explained to him that if we go through that door, maybe we will find my friend. He understood and took me to the security station. On the way, we passed by my classmates and my teacher. She ran up to me screaming and asking where I was and where Jake was. The staff member explained everything to her, and we all went to the security station together. My classmates were arguing with me that they didn't get on any other rides because they were looking for us for the past hour. I was shocked to know that only an hour passed by. As we walked, I explained everything to everyone. Some of my classmates laughed and didn't believe me, while others did. My teacher was quiet, but by her facial expression, I could tell she didn't believe me at all. Once we made it to the security station, there was one guard there, and the staff member and I told him everything. The hallways, the locked doors, the scream. But it felt like I was speaking a different language. He laughed at first, but became serious once he knew I wasn't joking. My teacher suggested looking at the security cameras. By this time, the principal came over and got informed on everything. As we watched the footage, I felt my heart racing. The camera showed Jake and me entering the room, but then it cut out. What happened? I asked. It shouldn't just go dark. The security guard called other staff to come and try to fix the issue. I suggested that they call 911, but they promised they'd find Jake, and I knew they weren't taking it seriously since they already thought I was exaggerating the story. I shouted at everyone, telling them I will call 911 myself and my parents if they couldn't help me find my best friend. I guess that caught their attention, and my teacher, the guide, and one of the security staff all agreed to go back and search with me to help find Jake. The principal watched my classmates while we all left. We returned to the area where the room was, but it was a hallway instead. The guide was very scared. He asked if this is what I saw. I told everyone this was what Jake and I had seen. As we approached the hallway again, every last one of us were breathing hard. I told everyone we couldn't split up, but as we entered the hallway, the atmosphere shifted. It felt wrong, as if we were being watched. When we reached the staircase, the staff member and my teacher began calling out for Jake. I joined in, shouting his name until my throat burned. The security guard just stood still with a flashlight. He explained that this area was always a scary story, that the staff members would try to scare new workers with telling them that this park had the back rooms, but it was never real. He couldn't process the fact that it wasn't a myth. I told him to get it together because my friend is still missing, and he's supposed to be the one to find him, or I'll go to the police. I don't know why I didn't call the police that day. That is something I still regret to this day. I explained to everyone that this staircase just led to a dead-end hallway with one door we couldn't open. I said it wasn't worth searching down there since Jake didn't go missing down there. But as soon as we turned around and began walking away, my body froze in fear. We heard Jake screaming for help down the stairs. The guard started jolting towards the steps until I yelled for him to stop. I told him that Jake couldn't be down there since it was only one door, and we couldn't get it open. We all froze, looking at each other on what to do next. The guard said he was going to go down there just to check it out. A few minutes passed, and we heard nothing. I made the decision to go down and see what was going on, and maybe he did find Jake. My teacher tried to stop me, but I went anyway. About halfway down the steps, I heard a scream. An older male scream. I knew it couldn't have been Jake's, but it had to have been the security. I ran down the steps to see him being pulled into the door at the end of the hallway. I ran to try to help him, but the door slammed right in front of me. I tried opening it, but it was locked tight again. I tried over and over again until the door handle broke off. I heard a loud thud against the door, as if someone threw his body against it. I ran in the opposite direction back to the staircase. When I made it back up, all I saw was the staff member. He looked as if he'd seen a dead body. I asked him what happened and where is my teacher. He pointed to one of the rooms. Once I had realized the rooms where all the doors were closed were all open, except for one door. The door he was pointing at. I looked down and saw blood coming from out of the room. He said he tried to pull her out as hard as he could, but it was as if the room was pulling her in. I grabbed him by the arm, and we started running. I told him this was getting out of hand, and that we needed to call 911. He agreed and tried looking for a way out. Once again, everything seemed like an endless loop. I yelled for Jake while we were running. My voice echoed through the hallways. But the only response was the low hum of the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. I heard the sound of a distant scream. This time it was clearer, more frantic. We both heard, "Help! Somebody help me!" We stopped in our tracks to see where the noise was coming. We heard it again, and I knew that it was Jake. I spun around with so much adrenaline coursing through my veins. I shouted that it was Jake. I ran toward the sound, knowing I had to reach him. The guide tried to keep up, and his voice shouting "Wait for me" grew distant. I didn't care in that moment. All I cared about was getting to Jake and getting out of there. The hallway twisted and turned, but I followed the sound of his voice. I told him I was coming. The hallways led me back to the staircase. The door with my teacher's blood on the floor now open. I didn't know which person to go to, but Jake's constant call for help made me choose him. I slowly walked down the steps, knowing that this is the same door that took the guard earlier and the same door I couldn't get past. Once I made it to the last step, the door was wide open. The hallway leading up to the door was different this time. It had symbols that were made in blood with bloody handprints and writings all along the hallway. I walked towards the door as I could still hear Jake crying for help. I walked through the door and the yelling and crying instantly stopped. It was a room with only one chair and one table in the middle. I looked around the room and there he was, tied up in chains. The key was next to him, so I used it and set him free. I felt like it was too easy, and whatever was down here with us either wanted to play a game and was bored now, or was tricking us. I told him everything as we walked back to the staircase. He told me he never saw the guard come into the room. We both agreed that this place makes people see things they only want them to see. We ran up the stairs and tried calling for the guide, but there was no answer. I told Jake that my goal was to find you, and I did, so we should just leave without finding him and let the cops do it. As we began to leave, I heard that thudding sound again, closer now. It was like a heartbeat, loud and ominous. We both, without hesitation, ran as fast as we could. But as we raced down the hall, everything shifted again. The corridor seemed to stretch infinitely, the exits becoming obscured. Panic gripped us as we darted through door after door, but every room was just a mirror of the last. Jake yelled, "Where are we?" I couldn't answer. I felt trapped and claustrophobic, like the walls were closing in around us. We dashed into another hallway, but suddenly Jake stumbled, falling to the ground. I turned back, reaching for him, but he looked terrified. I told him that we had to go while grabbing his hand, but as I pulled him up, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching from behind. I yelled at him to hurry up, pulling harder. The footsteps grew louder, echoing ominously through the corridor. I pulled him up and we ran again. At that moment, the realization hit me. Whatever was pursuing us was not going to let us escape. I could see the panic in Jake's eyes as we both scrambled back toward the way we came, but the area seemed to warp around us, disorienting me. I didn't know where I was going anymore. The thudding grew louder, almost rhythmic, drowning out everything else. I was getting tired and gasping to breathe, but all I could think about was escaping. We ran toward a hallway with two separate ways to turn. I went left and Jake went right. I turned around yelling for him to come back. He shouted that he'll find me, don't worry, and to keep going, and his voice disappeared. I knew he was right and that one of those hallways could lead us out. As I was running, I ran past a room where the guide was. I stopped and went back, and he was hanging from the ceiling. I didn't have time to stand and process. I had to keep moving forward. With one last glance, I took off down another corridor, praying that I could find a way out. I ran until my legs burned. Each step echoed in the oppressive silence, and the walls seemed to shift around me. As I turned a corner, I spotted a faint light in the distance. I raced toward it, hoping that was the way out. I stepped into the light and found myself back in the main area of the park, standing next to the familiar rides and attractions. But as I looked around, Jake was nowhere to be found. I turned around to go back and get Jake, but the door was just a wall. I tried kicking and pushing the wall in to see if it'll magically open, but it was just a wall. People stared at me as if I were crazy, but I didn't care. I was consumed by fear, desperate to find my friend. I rushed to the staff, pleading for them to help. I told them that my friend was missing, as well as my teacher and 2 of their staff members. Then I felt someone tap on my shoulder. My body fell on the ground in shock once I turned and saw that it was my teacher. That's all I could remember. I woke up an hour later with my teacher staring at me in the lobby of the Disney hotel. She asked me the same question earlier. Where was I and where is Jake? I asked her, how are you alive? And I told her the story already. My classmates were looking at me like I was crazy. I began hyperventilating and screaming that this wasn't real. She and some of the other staff had to calm me down. The principal came and took my classroom back to the park, and I felt like I was in a loop or dream. Then the same security officer came and asked what was going on. I asked where was the guide, and they asked me what guide. I explained everything to them once again, and even how I saw them die in the building. They looked very concerned for me. One of the managers had to come and explain that there is no guide for any behind-the-scenes kind of tour. They checked the cameras again, and it went dark as soon as me and Jake stepped into the building. But there was no third person with us. I told them that they had to find Jake, or I'd call 911. Thinking about prior before, I thought this would make them react with instant help and concern like it did before, but they agreed and called them. It was time for us to leave now and get back on the bus. I threw a tantrum saying he was still in there and we had to find him, but the manager and staff promised they would do something about it and try to find him. To make me more comfortable, we waited until the police arrived and they took my statement. I told them every single thing, and their mannerisms showed they didn't believe a word coming from my mouth. But they knew Jake was missing and that he had to be found. They ushered me onto the bus, and I felt a heavy weight settle over me as I took one last look at the park. The place that had once felt so magical was now filled with darkness. Jake's mom tried to sue Disney and the school but couldn't, and the case got dropped. To this day, I can't shake the feeling of dread whenever I think about that day. Jake is gone, and I can still hear his last scream echoing in my mind. I still question what the thing that called themselves a guide was and why they obviously wanted Jake. Every fall, my family has this tradition. We go on a big trip together, and usually to Disneyland. It's a blast. This year, my 3 cousins and I were finally old enough to stay in a different hotel alone, away from our parents. The idea of spending the weekend in Disneyland without adult supervision felt like pure freedom. Little did we know how quickly that freedom would turn into a nightmare. The first day was incredible. We rode the rides, screamed our lungs out, and devoured cotton candy. We had this little routine: hit the rides in the morning, grab lunch, then explore the shops. I was excited, living the dream with my cousins, Sarah, Mia, and Lily. But something felt off as the sun began to set. We were in line for one of the rides is when I first noticed him. A man lurking at the edge of the crowd. He was tall, with shaggy hair and a faded baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. At first, I thought he was just another tourist, but he kept glancing our way. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to think too much of it, though. I convinced myself that I was just being paranoid, and I didn't see him anymore throughout the day. That night, we went back to our hotel room. We all had a movie night and did face masks. I told them about the creepy man, but they laughed it off. But throughout the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I decided to stay up a bit longer than everyone else, scrolling through my phone when I heard a soft knock at the door. My heart raced. I quickly looked at the clock, and it was almost midnight. I asked who it was, but there was no answer. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole, and no one was there. I locked the deadbolt and returned to my bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. The next morning, everything seemed normal. We spent the day exploring and even tried to forget about the creepy guy. But later, while we were sitting near the castle, I spotted him again. He was standing farther away, watching us with that same unnerving gaze. I felt my heart drop. I got my cousins to notice him, and they felt uneasy. I suggested that we should go and tell our parents. Lily and Sarah were against the idea because they wanted the freedom of being away from our parents, and us telling them would lose the privilege of being on our own. We decided to leave that area and go back on some more rides. That evening, we went back to our hotel room to get ready for dinner. As I was getting ready, I noticed a note slipped under the door. I picked it up and it read, "I see you. Don't think you're safe." I screamed, and my cousins rushed over. I showed them the note, but instead of looking concerned, they just rolled their eyes. Sarah said it's probably just a prank. I asked them how could they shrug this off when they saw him earlier and were scared. Mia explained that she understood me and thought we should tell our parents. Lily shouted, "Get it together, girls, we finally get to feel older now, and you're acting like babies." I got upset and decided not to go out with them. They left and I was by myself in the room. The ticking clock was the only sound in the room. My eyelids grew heavy and I dozed off, but I jolted awake to a soft shuffle coming from the door. I waited, holding my breath, and then I heard a voice. "Help me," it whispered. I didn't recognize it. Then it said, "Please let me in." I tiptoed over to the door, peeking through the peephole again. The man was there, his face close to the door, a twisted smile on his lips. I backed away, horrified. I didn't know what to do. I said that I was calling the police to hopefully scare him away. Thankfully it worked and I watched him through the peephole run away. When my cousins came back, I didn't bother telling Sarah and Lily what happened. I told Mia and we both decided that whether they like it or not, we are going to tell our parents tomorrow. I wish I would have went to my parents sooner. The next morning, I woke up before anyone and went straight to my parents to tell them everything. Luckily, all of our parents were eating breakfast together. They all believed me and drilled me for not coming to them sooner. They all walked back to the hotel room with me. Sarah and Lily's parents scolded them for not telling what was going on. Mia's parents asked where Mia was, and since the bathroom door was closed and the light was on, we assumed she was in there. After a long time of our parents reprimanding us, we noticed Mia hadn't come out of the bathroom yet. We called for her to hurry up, but no response. Sarah went to go open the door, but Mia wasn't there. We all started panicking when we realized her phone and purse were still in the room. Our parents immediately went to the hotel staff. They told us to stay in the room and to not leave under any circumstances. We argued the entire time. Sarah was upset still, and I argued back that Mia is gone, and it was all our fault for not going to our parents sooner. After an hour went by, Mia or our parents haven't given us an update. We tried calling, but they didn't pick up. Lily and I decided to search the floor we were on, but she was nowhere to be found. I knew the man was involved. We went down to the lobby to find our parents. Just then, I spotted the man again, casually leaning against a wall, watching us. It seemed like he was enjoying this. He had a huge grin on his face. I told a staff member who was walking past, and the man left. Our parents saw us and told us to go back to our room, and they were figuring it out with the staff, and the police were on their way. I told Lily that I wanted to go back to the room by myself and clear my head. I just needed an excuse to try to find Mia myself. I searched all the floors going up and down the hallways, calling out her name. By the time I was on the top floor, I had given up. I didn't know where she was, and regret settled in my mind. I felt awful and responsible for her missing. I reached to the last room at the end of the hall. This room didn't have an adjacent room across from it. It was one of the suites. The door was slightly cracked, and before I could even think about the consequences of going into a stranger's room, I pushed the door open. I walked in and thought no one was in the room. It was dead silent. I walked into the bedroom and found Mia tied up in a chair. I rushed to her, tearing off the tape and untying her. "The man, he's in the bathroom," she whispered to me. Just as we made our way toward the door, the bathroom door swung open. The man stepped out, a predatory grin on his face. I pushed Mia behind me as he lunged at us. We were able to dodge his grabs and push him on the floor. He grabbed Mia's ankle and pulled her down with him, causing her to break it. I knew from that moment we couldn't run from him. We had no choice but to fight our way out of this situation. He reached for my phone and threw it on the other side of the room. He tried grabbing my ankle as well, but I kicked his hands away while Mia wrapped her arms around his neck, trying to keep him on the floor. I ran to grab my phone, but once I got to it, the man stood up. He ran towards me, and we both fell to the ground again. We fought over the phone until he got up and stepped on my hand, crushing my phone underneath it. I screamed in pain, and Mia began shouting for help. I saw him run to her and tried to strangle her. I remember thinking, this was it, and that Mia was about to die and I was next. That's when I heard, "Police, get on the ground." I looked over to see 4 police officers rush to him. 2 tackled him to the ground, while 1 was holding a gun to him, and the other helping Mia and me. They brought us down to the lobby where we saw our parents, Sarah and Lily. Luckily, they were able to know what floor we were on because Lily had my location and went to my parents saying I didn't come back to the room. They arrested him. We later found out that he had been watching us for years, waiting for the perfect moment, and he followed us to Disneyland. I would never forget that smile as he was led away. The trip to Disneyland turned into a nightmare I would never escape. It haunts all of us to this day.